Great. So we're in breakout session number 2, exploring data governance. My name is Kelsey Bieri. I'm a data governance consultant for a company called ICC, Information Control Company. You may have seen them if you've thrown the Thor hammer at action figures out there today. I have been with ICC for 2 years. We're an enterprise solutions and application development company, which pretty much means we do a little bit of everything in the realm of tech. I work in our data governance and data visualization practices that kind of migrate between the two. And today what we're going to be focusing on is data governance, as you probably know, which is why you're here. And when I was going through of how I wanted to approach the concept of data governance, I played around with putting up a myriad of definitions, which as we go through this presentation, you'll kind of see how that becomes a meta concept in itself on how to define data governance. But what I've decided to do instead of showing up a definition or making a joke about Webster's dictionaries, I decided to just show you throughout this presentation what data governance is and begin with a story. So, in December of 1998, NASA launched a Mars climate orbiter with the goal of advancing space exploration in the US space program. And 10 months later, in September of 1999, NASA promptly lost communication with the Mars orbiter and consequently lost the orbiter. Now, after a search and rescue team went out and they were trying to figure out what's going on, they abandoned the search after a couple days. I mean, if you can't find it immediately, if you're in space, you're not going to find it. When they did a peer evaluation to kind of see what tried to happen, they figured out that one team did all of their calculations with the metric system and the other team didn't. So when those calculations came together, what ended up happening is that the Mars orbiter flew 105 miles below where it was supposed to, and consequently it exploded, and NASA was out $328 million. So what we have is this dramatic incident of miscommunication, and you can put a price on miscommunication, and in NASA's situation, it was $328 million. Oh. A couple key points, though, before I do get started going into this. I'm not giving you a definition, but something to keep in mind that one of our main goals for data governance is to derive business value from data. And for that to happen, what we need to keep in mind is that despite this being a tech conference, so please don't boo me off the stage, data governance needs to be something that's business-owned, business-driven, and business-funded. And I'll go over that later in this presentation. Oh, sorry. Okay, so earlier this year, I had an opportunity to work with a client, and one of the principals at my company, who's actually here today in our front row, asked me, can I describe data governance in a small, medium, large scenario? So if we were going to a company and they just wanted a small version of data governance, what would that look like? And I took that back to one of my mentors at the company, and he told me that it's not so much that we're talking about small, medium, and large. What we're doing is we're talking about stages. How can we lay down a solid foundation that when more funding comes in and more sponsorship comes in, how can we thrive and build off of that? So that's what I took out to do. So if we're going into this, what I want to do is get everybody interested enough that they take away from here that they want to go do data governance for the rest of their lives, right? No, but what we actually want to do is talk about, I'm going to go over 4 main stages: data stewardship, business process alignment, and data quality. And I have remediation reiteration grayed out because that's something we're going to touch on, but not something we're going to focus on. Now, if we're going into data stewardship, the goal here is that we already have our sponsorship. We already have our buy-in, and we already have our interest going. So what we're doing is we're going to recruit business stewards. We're going to get our subject matter experts from all the different areas of our company who need to have their opinion put into the data. They know it better than everybody else, so their opinion matters. What we're going to do is after we have those business stewards, we go through a requirement stage where we're gathering these business terms. And someone said it earlier in our panel today, I loved the takeaway from that. It's not just getting someone to tell you what is happening, it's discovering how they're thinking. For this to become a really great platform that you're building your program off of, you have to have that buy-in from people, and discovering how they think and how they go through those processes is the way that you can make that successful. Now, with business terms, we know that some can be more important than others, which is where we have the concept of critical data elements that come into play. Now, a takeaway from this, that it's not everybody, but most of the time, critical data elements will be approximately 10 to 15% of your total business terms that you might be incorporating into your program at the initial launch. These are terms that people can absolutely not live without. Maybe it's on your executive reports that you're sending out, however you go about that with the rest of your stewards and you're defining that, those are your elements. Additionally, when you're going through that, is drafting your term definitions. Now, this seems something that might be pretty straightforward and easy for people, but if I were to have everybody in the room define the words eating healthy. So if I wanted to say, I eat really healthy because I eat 5 servings of vegetables a day, 3 servings of fruit, I don't eat carbs until 4 p.m., and then I eat whatever I want to after 4 p.m. For the record, that's not my eating habits whatsoever. They're way worse than that. But I love bread. I think my lunch was mainly bread today. But if I were to draft my definition of what it is eating healthy, and I took that to someone else, and they said, no, I eat healthy. I eat only grass-fed. I'm actually, another person might say, I'm a vegan. I don't eat any of that. That makes me healthier than you. And you, all of a sudden, you have this debate, if we were to break out in a session of all these people debating on what their definition is of eating healthy. Now, that's what happens, and take that on a scale and multiply it times 100, 200. No matter how many terms you have, you're going to have people disagreeing over it, especially if you're from marketing and you're going and you're talking to somebody in finance. The way that they define these things and the way that they're using their data is so different across the board, and it doesn't seem that way because we make assumptions for how we do our jobs. So we're taking this and we go on to stage 2, our business process alignment. So I'm moving through and I need to identify my business roles. So in this situation, we have our stewards, we have our draft glossary of how we're going to do things, and now we have to decide when we're allowed to use them or how we're allowed to use them. So we're constructing our business roles. This kind of comes into play if you were to say, this must be a valid social security number, or a social security number must be valid. What exactly does that mean for a social security number to be valid? And we move through that concept. Next, we're identifying process gaps. This is something if you're going through with your team and you're defining what it means to use these terms and definitions. A lot of times that this comes into scope for a discovery phase. People might say, how am I using my data? How am I supposed to be using my data? And this is something that my company loves to do, and this is something that people can do internally if they're really trying to figure out where those gaps are, and then you actually go through the process of aligning these business processes. So I'm actually going to do something that's probably a little off from what we've done today because I went through that incredibly fast. Are there any questions before I keep moving on? Okay. So once we do that, we move on to stage 3, which is our data quality stage. Now again, this is just a very high-level overview. We're dipping our toe in the water of what data governance is. But for data quality, this situation comes into play when, especially if we're talking to IT, from my personal experience, I was working on a retail project, and they said, my data is great. My data quality is great. The location of it's great. Everything is perfect. We don't need your help with that. It's not an issue. And what ends up happening is we break out into these focus groups, and we're talking to the business users of this data, and we dive into that infamous disconnect between IT and business, where we have all of the challenges that align with trying to get these 2 different teams to get along. And the first team says, yeah, you know, we need our data quality at 65%. We just need it to be 65 for what we're doing. It's awesome. And then downstream, the team that's using the same data needs their data quality at 83%. So they're talking, and they're, you know, bad-mouthing IT. They're saying our data quality is trash. It stinks. We can't get anything we want. We can't get anything we need. And IT's not understanding where all this hostility is coming from because Team 1's pumped about the 65%, and they're ready to go. So where does that disconnect come into play? So establishing these thresholds and getting everybody on the same side of how we're doing and monitoring those can significantly help not only your communication, but when you're going through your data quality, right, the garbage in, garbage out, it's a really an essential thing to focus on. Now, with that, we have the concept of identifying our data quality rules, right? These are our counterpoints to our business rules. So, using the example of social security number must be valid, what does that mean for a social security number to be valid? So we have that 324 format, what numbers are allowed to be in it, what numbers can't be, the location of those numbers, extensively applying what those rules are. We have a person at our company who loves to say there are 1,200 ways to spell Ohio. He was working with a manufacturing company who had 1,200 different ways of spelling Ohio in their database. 1,200, and it's a 4-letter state. So if we're getting into the more complicated states that people don't really know how to spell anyway, that kind of becomes a problem, and that just becomes dramatically different. Or if we're dealing with the concepts of prefixes, right? There's an example that a company that I've worked for, or with, I'm sorry, that had 1,800 different prefixes in their database. Anything from all uppercase, all lowercase, to G, 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 repeated 10 times because no one's taking care of this and monitoring their data quality. So this is an issue. Now, where that alignment of business and tech comes into play is that while data governance is something that is business-owned and business-driven, it doesn't have a chance of being successful without IT. So that's why I didn't want you to boo me off the stage. It was going to come full circle, I promised. But aligning your business rules and your data quality rules, that's how you get everybody to come together and agree on things, because I guarantee you, this is going to be a battle when you're starting off with. And if it's not, you have a problem. If everyone's just agreeing right off the bat, saying, fine, that's how it's going, what's happening is we're not actually having a buy-in to the program. So if everyone's just saying, I don't care how you're defining that because I'm going to use it my own way anyway, then you don't have a chance of being successful. So moving on to focusing on this remediation reiteration really quick. This ties into play, especially if you're doing something from focusing on one department, trying to launch a successful data governance program just to get the ball rolling. So how this happens is you get to the end, like anything, we learn from our mistakes, we learn how to grow, and we can go back and we can fix things that maybe we would have missed in the first place. So now that we have just this high-level overview of maybe the 4 little components that go into data governance, talking about our universal goals that go along with that. So across industries, across programs, what we're looking for is protecting the needs of our data stakeholders. So especially when you're tying into making sure that your executive sponsorship is very happy, a way to do that is making sure that everyone in your program is happy with the work that you're doing. They don't need to be happy all the time. They just need to be happy for when it comes time to do that check-in when you're getting towards the end, right? Not everybody has a good day every day. But once we have that done and we understand how they're going to be using their data, how they want to use their data, and their opinions were respected and considered for building out this program, that's what's crucial for getting that cultural adaptation. So then we're going into building standard repeatable processes, right? So this isn't something that's an easy thing to launch to begin with. And if we make sure that it's not repeatable and we have to recreate the wheel every single time, no one's going to want to do it. So if we start off from the ground running, trying to get as much possible that we can harvest and reuse again, that's the goal. And that makes it easier every reiteration that you do and every time you continue to build out your program. Additionally, we always want to enable better decision making, and that's going to tie into the ROI section, and we move into that. Our goal is not just to make our data better for our users, it's how, going back to the requirements gathering, right? Not just having people tell you what they think, but how they think. So if we can enable better decision making for how users are doing and going about their data every single day, think about the potential that that has for your company. Your company is already alive and thriving, and you're succeeding somehow, but what if you can build off of that and build off of your decisions and make them even better than they already are? Another grayed out section is reducing cost and increasing effectiveness. This is something that's incredibly important and is a universal goal. I'm going to really dive into this on our return on investment section, where we're really deriving the value of data governance. But before I move on, does anybody have any questions? I love questions. Okay. So how does data governance impact different industries? This is something from a very high level that we're going to be diving into, but it is, applicable. So we have retail, banking, healthcare, artificial intelligence not being an industry itself, though it kind of is, but I just wanted to talk to how it's impacting all those other components. So out of these 3 things, or even artificial intelligence, how many people does this apply to in the room? Okay. I'll take it. That was like 50%. Okay. So data governance in retail. So something that we hear all the time, I've been on a couple projects for retail, which has been awesome, is developing that 360 view of the customer. Now this is something that's a total buzzword right now that everybody loves to use, but they might not necessarily know what it means, and they might not necessarily know how to get there. So what we're trying to do is, how can we leverage our data, how can we leverage our quality of data, and how we're using it to really emphasize the cross-sell, upsell. So I worked at Buckle when I was in high school, and Buckle's definition of cross-sell, upsell was that we had little sheets of paper that had every category of clothing that we sold in the store. So pants, shirts, swimsuits, jackets, anything. It doesn't matter what time of year it was always the same sheet. So if I had a customer come in and they were interested in buying pants, do we have anyone who's stepped inside of a Buckle store before? Okay, the aggressive salesman, right? So there's like a joke that there's the Buckle challenge, that if you go into Buckle, you touch the back wall and you leave without someone coming up to you, then that's supposed to be a successful trip. So someone would go into the dressing room with their pair of pants, and then my goal as an associate was to give them a shirt, a tank top, a pair of shoes, a purse that would all go so great with the pair of pants that they have in their dressing room. The goal being that if you bombard them with enough clothing, that eventually they'll just buy more to either, one, get you out of their face, or two, because you actually do strike gold and they're really interested in what you're getting. Now, for me, I was not very extroverted in my beginning high school stages, which is when I worked there. So my goal was to get these people into the dressing room as fast as possible and not have to talk to them the rest of the time, and then they just leave, and I'm just bummed because I'm making no commission at this job, but I don't have to talk to people, so it was fine. The story of how I even got to that job is completely different than what we're talking about, and it is a pretty funny story if you find me later. But, excuse me. So what if we could go from there? So what if instead of making it so someone has to have years of experience of being in a dressing room, bombarding people with clothing to understand what works and what doesn't work, it was really easy for someone to have a tablet in front of them that they knew what items sold with other items. And the way for that to happen, right, we talked about that earlier with Stitch Fix, that was brought up on the panel earlier today, the effectiveness of having a team of data scientists are selling clothes that people want together. Now, if they're not having governance around how that data is being used, and they're not governing the quality of their data that's being used, they're not going to have a successful platform that they're building this business off of. So we're leveraging a golden version of customer data, especially in retail. This is also applicable in banking. So all the industries that I'm talking about, I'm focusing on information that is particularly useful for that industry, but there's going to be a ton of overlap between the industries I'm talking about in regards to the data governance components on why it's beneficial to them. But leveraging a golden version of customer data, this is kind of going into master data management, if anyone's familiar with that. But what happens is, especially in retail, we have so many different platforms where we're consuming customer information. And what happens is we have customers that are getting repeated across platforms and across information. And how much beneficial would it be if we could consolidate that, not just for redundancy's sake, but because we would discover more and more metadata about this person. We would understand furtherly, if we're gathering social media data, how this person had a great customer experience or how they didn't. So if that's being stored in one place, their buyer preferences are being stored in another place, right? We have that misalignment of information. We have a mismatch. So creating that holistic view of a customer. So if we're going into data governance and banking, we have the fear-driven data quality. So not our data governance because we believe that it could help us thrive in a particular way, but because if we don't have it, we're terrified that we're going to become part of the $100 billion compliance industry about where people mess up and they have to make up their mistakes, or the amount of money that people go in to make sure that they don't make any mistakes, right? We're transferring it, we're taking accountability for it. So we have BCBS 239, Dodd-Frank, CCAR. So all of these things come into play about why banks are really striving to do data governance. I had the opportunity to do a webinar earlier this year on the benefits of data lineage. So if we were to track the time a person opens up something for the first time for a bank, I want to open up my account, and I can see all that trickle down of information down to every single source system that's stored in with a simple query that we're deriving that from, right? That's the ideal data lineage component that we're working for. But instead of approaching it from just a fear-based, what banking industries and retail and healthcare can get out of it is increased revenue from improved analytics, right? Garbage in, garbage out. Operational cost optimization through elimination of redundancy. We're actually going to go into ROI, a great example of how a company can save an extraordinary amount of money by addressing the redundancies that they have. Additionally, IT cost reduction through data assets and tool streaming, kind of tying into that redundancy concept. So data governance in healthcare. When I was doing this research, I found a really interesting article, Dimensional Insight, company based out of Massachusetts. They interviewed more than 100 CIOs and CMIOs for healthcare. 44% had an enterprise-wide data governance capability, which is great. 56% had incomplete or non-existent data governance efforts, not so great. 70% cited limited resources, which have hindered their momentum. And 57%, their largest challenge is resource scarcity. Because what happens if we're driving back to that stage one that we talked about, so you're identifying your business stewards. These are people that use the data intimately. They know it better than everybody else in your company. Those people have full-time jobs. They're doing stuff every single day. They're really busy and they're really great at it, which is why you want them as a business steward. So that means that when you're launching this program in the beginning, they don't have time to do what you want them to do, right? If you're asking for 4 to 12 hours a week just to get the ball rolling, that's 4 to 12 hours a week that they have to do in additional to their full-time job. So that's a big undertaking to ask for people, which is why it's so important to get people really excited about it, to get that cultural buy-in, and to get that executive sponsorship to give you that supplemental support that you need that can trickle down through the rest of the workforce. So for data governance in healthcare, organizational goals, increasing our trust in organizational data, improving quality of care and patient safety. Something else that came up on a panel earlier today was the awesome effects of having artificial intelligence, which we're going to talk about a little bit later, in healthcare, right? So instead of having that one person who is looking at you, who went to one school, so who has an incredibly intelligent abundance of information, but still just it's one viewpoint, you can have the aid of artificial intelligence. But all you're going to do, if you don't have that high data quality, artificial intelligence will just help you get to the wrong answer faster if you're asking the wrong questions. So that's why it's so important to make sure you're monitoring and defining everything you meet. This is an issue especially with Alexa, right? We love the app and it's amazing and Siri and stuff like that, but if we're not defining how data should be used and if we're not using it correctly, people could be asking it questions and it could be spitting out inappropriate answers or incorrect answers because we're not defining things and we're not giving it rules and restrictions on how this is allowed to be used. Excuse me. So I recently had walking pneumonia, which is a really dramatic way of saying I had very mild pneumonia. And I went into urgent care and they were doing the diagnosis codes, so ICD codes, and it's crazy how many of them there are. So I'm talking to my practitioner and she said, would you classify your voice as a soft rasp, a soft hard rasp, a medium rasp, or a hard rough rasp? And I just stared at her like, I have no idea. My throat is really sore and I don't know. And this is, she wasn't asking to be inconvenient, she was trying to classify because they have so many different ICD codes and they're all incredibly important, especially for if you're getting to the point of secondary diagnosis or if you're trying to find an overarching condition, properly annotating that is important. So difficulties that we have with data governance, I'm sorry, I'm going to go back really quick because I skipped 2. So maintaining regulatory compliance, just like banking has several different regulatory compliance they have to meet, healthcare has it too. We have HIPAA, of course, and they have others, and we also want to succeed with new payment models. So as healthcare rapidly evolves, we talked about Cardinal Fuse earlier, succeeding with implementing and being able to keep up. Well, on the panel, this is great. The panel gave me a lot to add to this throughout the presentation, which is awesome. But when they were talking about earlier is how healthcare is becoming more and more IT driven, which is amazing, but with that becomes more and more responsibility of how we're tracking it. So difficulties is the variance in buy-in from hospital leadership, right? They have amazingly well-trained physicians and surgeons, nurses, all alike, who went to school extensively and who are incredibly intelligent people, so they can compensate for it. So we have data issues, we get it, but we also have great, awesome, smart people that can compensate for it on their side. And then IT is saying, okay, but no, that's actually not working for us, and we have to do way more work to keep up with that. So differences in how data measures are defined, this is something that's stretched across industries. This isn't something that's just in the realm of healthcare. But conflict and disagreement between departments, right? So we have that infamous disconnect between business and IT, but also within departments on the business side and within departments on the IT side, people feel very strongly on how they use their data, and they do feel that their way is the best way. Concept of unforeseen costs. Full-fledged data governance programs are expensive, which is why we like to hear about the small, medium, large versions and the stages 1, 2, 3, 4, because it's a lot to get up and running. And also, it's incredibly time-consuming. So we talked about how people have these full-time jobs, and then they're supposed to be doing this on top of it. But with data governance and artificial intelligence, that's when we kind of get into the concept of right data versus right algorithm. So I read an incredibly interesting article when I was doing research for this that talked about how right data is more important than the right algorithm. So we have a department at my company called Advanced Analytics, which are full of data scientists who say things that 95% of the time go way over my head. The level that they think on is absolutely insane. But I was talking to our chief data scientist about artificial intelligence with healthcare, and the statistics and probabilities and everything that you're incorporating in to make artificial intelligence one step closer for happening is more complicated than just a simple algorithm, especially if you're not focusing on the data that you're feeding into the algorithm. So that goes into garbage in, garbage out. I'm saying it and I'm repeating it because it's so incredibly important, especially if you are dealing with people's lives, right? So if you're not actually taking the time to look into the information that's feeding into it, that's incredibly detrimental, not only for your company and for your patients that are visiting you. Then there goes into the concept of AI plus people. There's an overarching worry that as artificial intelligence becomes more prominent, that people kind of get pushed aside in the process. But what I actually would say is that people's role just might be changing in how they're viewing it. So it's the morality of our data. So with cars, right, self-driving cars, everyone's really excited about it. What if something goes wrong and you're in a car by yourself? There is no way around it. You're going to collide with a minivan that has a family, single mom, 4 children, and they have a dog in the car. Is it your car's responsibility to save you or to save the family? Is it their car's responsibility to save the family or to save you? What's the morality that we're weighing on it? So this is something it's not a hypothetical anymore because we're moving closer and closer to making this a reality. So where do we tie that into play, right? So people are more empathetic than a computer. People have their morality and their experiences, and this is almost to the point of being an ethical debate. So, and it sounds a little dramatic as I'm saying it out loud, but what we're actually in the situation is that data governance wouldn't be optional anymore. Because if we're coming to a conclusion on who does the car save, or how am I addressing a patient's health care, this is something that has to be so thoroughly documented and thought through and processed that there can be absolutely no room for mistakes when there's people's lives at your hands. So documenting the definitions of that data, but more importantly, putting in those rules of how it's being used really ties into play. Any questions? Okay, you know I like my question stops. So if we're going to go talk about ROI, because our goal here is the value of data governance, there's the abstract concept of data governance, ROI, right? So it'll make your company better, it'll make your data better, everyone will be really stoked about it because they don't have to go looking for what they're supposed to be doing with it. But there's actually also the hard-hitting realities of it. So risk mitigation, removing redundancies, establishing our 360 view of customers, and improving our efficiency. So how does that tie into what we're doing? So for risk mitigation, we touched on it a little bit. So we reduce our exposure to financial fraud. This especially comes in if we're talking about banking. Being able to track everything in banking is incredibly crucial, especially today. If banks can't produce that lineage that I mentioned earlier, they're in a lot of trouble. So being able to track that information is incredibly important for them. So align and integrate various views of risk management. build confidence with stakeholders, successfully respond to a changing business environment, and reduce unacceptable performance variability. So if we're going through, align and integrate various views of risk management. So if we get everybody on the same page of what's important, what they need to focus on, that can be incredibly beneficial to a company. So if we're talking about removing redundancies, this is an example that I have of the IBM Data Governance Unified Process. So we have 950,000 customers in a marketing list. This is a real life situation. Now, out of that 950,000 customers, there were 90,000 duplicate matches of people. So every year, there would be 2 mailings that would cost $300, I certainly hope not, $3.25. And every year, there would be 4 outbound telemarketing calls that would cost $1.50. So if we multiply 90,000 times that, we get a total of $1,125,000 that could have been avoided if we would have gotten rid of all of the redundancies in our databases. Now, this is something that was for a marketing company, but this is applicable to any company that does advertisement, especially if we're looking at retail. How many people get, let's see, for a couple of retailers that I subscribe to, when they go and you give them your email address, I get 4 emails a day. And if you are in there somehow, you're in that system twice, that's just flooding your inbox full of information, right? So in this company's situation, their total cost of their data quality solution, their tools, plus they opted to hire a full-time steward for this, cost them $700,000, which meant that it only took them 7.5 months to get that money back. Now that was for one aspect of that they did. So they were focusing on redundancies in their systems, and they were able to earn that money back in 7.5 months. So think about how profitable that is if you're moving forward a year or 2 years, especially because if you're focusing on that and you have your steward in line, they're preventing that redundancy from happening again. So your money will only continue to come back to you because you're not flooding your system with excess information. No, we talked about this earlier, especially with retail, so defining that 360 view of customers, and you're deriving your business value. So you can rationalize conflicting information. So we talked about what happens if you're in multiple different systems. People can gather more information about you if it's together, but they can also rationalize the conflicting information. So if they have multiple addresses for you, things along that nature, they can bring that all together. Maintaining a golden record, we talked about that. Integration of high quality data across multiple enterprise systems. If you have different people in your company who are all pulling data out of different systems, but they need to be using the same data, making sure that's consistent across everything helps keep your business consistent, helps keeps the culture consistent, and helps make your data governance program successful. And that can also happen if you opt to just collect all of your customer information in one central location. We know, especially as companies dramatically grow, it's a lot easier for them to just keep tacking on things as their database and their systems develop than to do the rationalization process, because it's a really hard task to take on and it's incredibly time consuming. So when you're doing your data governance, when you're doing your data governance program and you're bringing all of that together, having the opportunity to have that one centralized location. Evolving customer needs and sentiments. So if I all of a sudden change my demographic group, or if I'm starting to get older but I'm still a loyal customer, how can they retarget how they're addressing me? So as a customer, let's say, okay, let's rewind 3 years. So I graduated college and I'm entering into the workforce. So my needs as a customer, if I'm in a clothing retail situation, might be dramatically shifting, right? So in college, people aren't putting necessarily a lot of effort into their appearance for everyday classwear, but then when they're going into the workforce, all of a sudden they might need to be dressing business casual, business professional. They might need an entirely new wardrobe, and when they're shopping, they're changing the way that they shop because they have different needs as a user. So if I can track that, and if I can keep part of that and track my customer evolution and sentiment, that can be incredibly valuable to me. Additionally, we have the concept of improving our efficiency. So increasing sales, decreasing costs, increasing effectiveness. And it's not the concept that if I can make myself more efficient, I can make my company leaner, More often than not, what I've seen is that people have full-time jobs. In addition to that, they have to do really annoying tasks to fix the data that's coming into them. So these people are working 60, 70 hours a week because they have to do an entirely different job on their current job to fix all the information that's going in. The company that I mentioned earlier where they had the data threshold discrepancy, what ended up happening is that the users downstream who said, no, I want my data quality to be at 83%. What happened is that they would spend a lot of their time trying to get that data quality to 83%. So they needed it to be at 83 just to do their everyday jobs. But they were on top of that, had to spend a significant part of time, or one lonely person on the team had to spend a significant amount of time just to bring that quality up. So what happens is you could have the possibility of dividing your team up, so splitting them up so one person can take care of that while the rest of you do the tasks that you were meant to do. Or overall, it's just kind of debilitating to your team. So addressing risk management, removing our redundancies, establishing our 360 view of our customer, and improving efficiency. So in terms of next steps, I know everyone was incredibly intrigued today, and you can't wait to start your data governance program or process. If you are interested in trying to figure out how to build a use case for your company or where you are, I would start with a business term, identifying a term that you use in your everyday life. So a generic one that you can use as customer, if it's applicable to you, and sit down, take 10 minutes to write a thorough definition of customer. You can make it customer first name, last name, however you want to define it, or just what a customer is to you. Now, go to 6 different people in your company, 6 different departments, and have them define the word customer. Now, when you have those 6 different definitions with minimal overlap with each other, you'll have the beginning of your use case. And with that, you can start to build off of, okay, I have half a dozen different definitions of customer just from talking to half a dozen different people. So if we take this enterprise-wide, how many different definitions am I going to get? And that's just with one word. So that's kind of how you can start to do your buy-in. And then for any other quick hits, tips, or tricks, please connect with me on LinkedIn or reach out to me at kbieri@icc.com. I would love to talk to anybody and everybody about data governance needs, constructive feedback, also about bees, because I love bees. So I wanted to take a second really quick to talk about our rapidly declining bee populations and ways that we can make bees more friendly. So we can make your yard bee friendly by planting flowers. Weeds are a great thing for bees. Don't use chemicals to treat your lawn. Buy local, including honey. And bees are incredibly thirsty, so laying out just a little bit of water in your yard can go a long way. That was an amazing, crazy detour that made no sense with what I'm talking about, but just wanted to throw that out there. So please reach out to me at kbieri, and I talk so fast, and while my practices went the full 40 minutes, 45 minutes, this did not. So please ask me questions, because now I will be standing up here for a very long time until our next session. So thank you all for your time today. Yes, awesome.
So you mentioned pretty much bringing everybody to the table as you need to bring to the table definitions as you start the practice of data governance. What do you do when you have people who are reluctant to come to the table? Because you mentioned they all have full-time jobs. What have you used to get them there?
Right. So a lot of times people are reluctant to come to the table because they don't want to, right? Well, obviously, no, but they're going to use it the way they want to use it, right? So they're saying, I don't care about this because I'm just going to revert back and use it exactly how I want to. So what I've found and what my team has found in those scenarios is that if you can break out and talk to that person one-on-one and you figure out why is it that you're so determined to use the data how you want to use it instead of coming to a compromise talking to other people, a decent amount of time, it's because they have a very specific use case. So what you can do in those situations is if you can get them to come to the table to talk about their specific use case because they want to be heard. Most of the time it's saying, I want to use it my way anyway. So if you can get them to talk about why their way is important, then what you can do is either establish a policy that they're allowed to use it a specific way that fits their needs if everyone else of your stewards agrees with it, or you can really work with them to try to come over to your side, which is it's a much more difficult path, but to kind of get that cohesiveness can really play out. So it's a little bit of playing to the ego and a little bit of willing to make compromises. You're always going to have, no matter where you go, that person that's a little strong-headed, which is great. Friction is great, especially for establishing a program like this. Yes?
When you have, so I talk to a lot of different people trying to gather requirements for the usage of data. And so people will come to me and they'll talk to me about their own use cases, but in some cases they have a hard time articulating what they're using it for or why they use it a certain way. Are there other methods, short of sitting with them and watching them do their job, that kind of help bring out those details? Because what I experience is a lot of times what people ask for isn't what they need.
Right, exactly. So the question was, if people didn't hear it, people not necessarily what they ask for is not what they need, so kind of figuring out how to dive deeper into that. There are people who are way more qualified than me to probably answer that question, but I'll take a shot at it. In my experience, what happens that really dives into going into trying to figure out how people think and how people go throughout their day rather than having them tell you. A way that you can do this is having a mini session with that person where they just walk through a day in the life. So you have them tell you what they do every single day. You don't have to sit through them. They can go through an accelerated conversation with you. This is what I do every single day. And then if you have them then tell you why they do it every single day, why is it they're doing the way that they're doing, you can start to articulate that requirements gathering process to try to ask them those harder questions that they may not have thought about it to begin with. Okay, well, thank you, everybody. Oh, yes, yay, question.
So tell me about your love of bees. When did that start?
Love of bees. Okay, great. Thank you for asking about the bees. No, I'm just teasing. My people in my company who are here are probably mortified. So bees, right, without our bee pollination can affect 80% of our fruits and vegetables. And while I made a joke about not being really eating healthy, I try to at least sometimes pretend that I'm a healthy eater, so without that proper pollination, we're in a lot of trouble. But no, my sister is actually really obsessed with bees, so she kind of just talks about it all the time. But yeah. And I I had a presentation for work this past Friday on gender diversity, and I threw that in there just to kind of lighten the mood a little bit, and everyone just told me to put it in this, so I feel like I got a little mixed reviews this time, so I'll have to bring that back to them. Okay, well, thank you, everybody. I'll be up here if anyone has any questions, and I gave you like 10 minutes back, so have a great last session.